Imagine waking up one day and discovering that your government owes more money than it can ever repay. And because of this, your taxes are skyrocketing, your wages are shrinking, your land is being seized, and your children could be forced into servitude just to cover someone else's loans. This might sound like a dystopian novel, but this has happened over and over throughout history. From ancient civilizations to modern nations, debt has been more than numbers on paper. It has been a tool of power, a weapon of control, and sometimes a direct cause of human suffering. To truly understand the impact of debt, we must journey through time and uncover the biggest debt scandals in history, stories that are rarely told, yet shaped the world as we know it today. Our story begins with ancient Rome, a civilization often remembered for its emperors, gladiators, and monumental architecture. Beneath the grandeur, however, lay a harsh economic reality. Farmers, the backbone of Roman society, were often forced into debt slavery when they could not pay exorbitant interest rates on loans. Families were torn apart, lands were confiscated, and the poorest citizens found themselves trapped in a cycle of financial bondage. Even when reformist emperors like Julius Caesar attempted to alleviate the burden through debt forgiveness, the wealthy elite manipulated the system to retain their power and wealth. In Rome, debt was not just financial, it was personal, generational, and sometimes fatal. Ordinary people paid the ultimate price, while the empire expanded its power and influence. Moving forward to Renaissance Italy, the city of Florence became the birthplace of modern banking, led by the infamous Medici family. The Medici Bank loaned money to kings, popes, and merchants, often without proper safeguards. When a major debtor defaulted, the bank collapsed, dragging entire economies into turmoil. Citizens who had trusted the bank with their life savings woke up to find themselves destitute overnight. This scandal demonstrated that private debt could destabilize nations and set the precedent for financial crises centuries later. The story of Florence teaches us that even in prosperous times, debt can quietly build a system of inequality and chaos. The consequences of debt become even more striking in pre-revolutionary France. By the late 18th century, France was drowning in debt due to wars, royal extravagance, and unrestrained borrowing from international banks. Ordinary. Citizens faced crushing taxes, while the aristocracy and clergy enjoyed privileges and exemptions. The financial inequality created anger and desperation, contributing directly to the French Revolution. Debt was no longer just a ledger problem. It became a social crisis, sparking riots, upheaval, and the ultimate overthrow of the monarchy. Money didn't just fuel France's economy, it fueled its revolution. And while kings and nobles debated budgets in marble halls, the people suffered hunger, disease, and financial ruin. Across the Mediterranean, the Ottoman Empire faced a similar fate in the 19th century. Once a dominant power, the empire borrowed heavily from European nations to fund wars and infrastructure projects. But the loans came with astronomical interest rates, and when the empire could not repay, Britain and France seized control of Ottoman finances. Ordinary citizens suffered as taxes soared, inflation destroyed savings, and poverty spread across the land. Some historians argue that the empire collapsed without firing a single bullet, highlighting how debt can be a silent but deadly force, stripping nations of sovereignty and citizens of freedom. The empire's experience is a cautionary tale about how external lenders can manipulate entire nations, while ordinary people remain powerless. In modern times, the 20th century saw a series of catastrophic debt crises in Latin America. Countries like Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico borrowed heavily from international banks to fund development projects and support corrupt regimes. When interest rates surged during the 1980s, these nations defaulted, triggering hyperinflation, unemployment, and social unrest. Ordinary people bore the consequences of financial mismanagement they had no control over. Governments were forced to cut essential services, and millions faced economic despair. These crises coined the term debt trap, illustrating that even contemporary economies are vulnerable to the same patterns that destroyed ancient civilizations. But debt scandals are not confined to nations alone. Corporate and banking collapses have also shaped history. Consider the Medici Bank's collapse, or the more recent 2008 global financial crisis, when reckless lending, over-leveraging, and complex financial derivatives caused banks to fail and economies to teeter on the brink of disaster. Ordinary citizens lost homes, pensions, and savings, while government bailouts largely protected the wealthy elite. The human cost of financial mismanagement repeats across eras, showing us that debt is not merely an abstract concept. It is a mechanism of power, inequality, and control. Debt has also played a hidden role in wars throughout history. Governments have borrowed vast sums to fund conflicts, leaving future generations to pay for battles they didn't fight. From the Napoleonic Wars to World War II, loans and debt financing have been instrumental in shaping political outcomes. Ordinary citizens end up paying through taxation, inflation, and economic hardship, highlighting once again that debt is both a weapon and a trap. Even the United States, which today dominates global finance, has its own history of debt-fueled wars, from the Revolutionary War to World War II, showing that no nation is immune. Some of the most shocking debt scandals involve hidden international deals and secret loans. For instance, during the 19th and early 20th centuries, European powers lent enormous sums to countries like Egypt and the Ottoman Empire, loans often designed to enslave nations economically. These debts were used to justify control over railways, resources, and even political decisions. Ordinary citizens, of course, were the ones who paid, often through higher taxes or lost property, while foreign creditors profited immensely. The lessons are clear. Debt is rarely neutral, and behind every number is a story of human cost and manipulation. Even smaller nations have faced devastating debt scandals. Take Greece in the early 21st century, for example. Heavy borrowing combined with economic mismanagement and corruption led to a near collapse in 2010. Ordinary Greeks faced austerity measures, skyrocketing unemployment, and loss of public services. Protests, riots, and social unrest followed. Yet the international financial institutions and creditors were largely insulated from the consequences. This is a modern echo of ancient patterns. Debt hits the powerless hardest, while the powerful remain protected. Debt has also shaped human lives on a personal level throughout history. In many societies, from Rome to medieval Europe to colonial India, failing to pay loans could result in debt bondage, forced labor, or even the loss of family members. Wealthy lenders and elites often structured loans so that failure was inevitable for the poor. In effect, debt became a tool of oppression, ensuring that social hierarchies remained intact and wealth remained concentrated in the hands of a few. Looking at the global perspective, the history of debt shows an enduring pattern. Those in power create, manipulate, and exploit financial systems, while ordinary people shoulder the burden. From ancient Rome to Renaissance Italy, from France's pre-revolution debt to the Ottoman Empire, and into modern Latin America and Europe, the lesson is undeniable. Debt is never neutral. It can enrich some, enslave others, topple empires, and spark revolutions. Understanding these scandals is not just about looking into the past. It's about recognizing how the same forces operate in today's global economy, where nations, corporations, and individuals continue to navigate the complex web of money and power. In the end, The biggest debt scandals in history are not just tales of numbers and ledgers. They are stories of human struggle, ambition, greed, and survival. They remind us that money has always been a double-edged sword, a source of prosperity for a few, and a tool of oppression for many. By studying these events, we gain insight not only into history, but also into the present and the future, learning how to recognize the warning signs of debt traps and the importance of financial responsibility, transparency, and fairness. Debt is not merely an economic term. It is a force that has shaped civilizations, influenced wars, and determined the lives of millions throughout history. And as long as humans continue to borrow, lend, and manipulate money, the stories of debt, struggle, and scandal will continue. Because history, it seems, has a way of repeating itself.